Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at the world of global Englishes.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
We're going to be tackling a pretty dense academic paper from TESOL Quarterly.
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
It's kind of considered one of the top journals in the field of, teaching English as a second language.
It's a good one, yeah.
Our goal today is to really unpack what this shift toward global Englishes actually means for, well, anyone, really, whether you're a teacher or a learner or just, interested in how language changes over time.
Right.
So one of the things this paper really highlights is this big change in who speaks English these days.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not mostly native speakers anymore.
Right.
The majority of English speakers worldwide are those who learned it as a second language.
Yeah, the article actually points out that most English conversations that are happening right now are probably between people who learned it as a second or third, even fourth language.
Wow. That's a big change from what a lot of us might think. So what does that mean for English learners today?
Yeah.
Who are they most likely talking to?
Right. It really challenges that traditional idea of, who an English speaker is.
Right.
Learners today are much more likely to be interacting with other non-native speakers.
Makes sense.
And in a really wide variety of contexts. It has these huge implications for how we should be teaching English. Does it still make sense to focus so much on, imitating a native speaker standard?
That's a really good question. And, the academic world is definitely responding to this.
For sure.
We're seeing all these new fields of study emerging, world Englishes.
Yeah.
English is a lingua franca or ELF.
ELF, yeah.
And they all kind of fall under this bigger term, global Englishes.
That's right. The main idea that kind of connects all these perspectives is that English isn't this single fixed thing anymore.
Yeah.
It's diversified into all these different varieties, each with their own, pronunciation, grammar,
Right.
even vocabulary sometimes.
So are we saying goodbye to correct English?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing that correctness isn't absolute.
Right.
I mean,
right.
if two people from different parts of the world who, neither of them are native speakers, if they can understand each other perfectly well,
Yeah,
then their English is clearly serving its purpose.
that's a good point.
The focus kind of shifts from strict adherence to a specific standard
Right.
to effective communication in, real life situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how is this actually playing out in real classrooms?
Yeah.
Are we seeing a whole new way of teaching English?
There is this growing movement toward what they call global English's language teaching.
Right. GLT?
GLT. So instead of just focusing on, a British or American accent.
Right. A GLT classroom might expose students to a lot of different kinds of Englishes from around the world.
Yeah, exactly. So, a student in Mexico City, for example.
Right.
They might hear examples of English spoken in Nigeria, Singapore, India.
Wow.
All in the same lesson.
That's so cool. And it's not just accents, right?
Right.
GLT also includes cultural references and idioms and just different ways of communicating, right?
Yeah. And the goal is really to prepare learners for, the real world.
Right.
For that diversity of English that they're going to encounter.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that also take some of the pressure off of learners?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, how realistic is it to expect everyone to sound like they're from the BBC?
Right. It can be incredibly liberating for learners to realize that they don't have to erase their own accent.
Right.
Or, their cultural background.
Right.
To be successful in English.
Yeah, I bet. And early research is showing that these global Englishes approaches can really have a big impact on learners' attitudes and their identities, right?
Yeah, that's right. Students are reporting that they feel more confident, more engaged, knowing that their own way of speaking English is valid and valuable.
That's great to hear. But, are there any downsides to this approach?
Well, one of the challenges is that change, especially in education, doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And there are, powerful forces out there, like the standardized testing industry, for example,
Right.
that are often resistant to change. I mean, their business models are built around, evaluating English proficiency based on a pretty narrow set of criteria.
So someone who learned English in their local community and uses it effectively every day might still be disadvantaged by a standardized test that prioritizes like a very specific accent.
That's right. Yeah. Raises all sorts of questions about fairness, and whether these tests are actually measuring, communicative competence
Right.
in a globalized world.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's not just testing, is it?
No.
I imagine the textbook industry also plays a big role in how English is taught and how people think about it.
You're right. A lot of commercial textbooks,
Yeah.
even those that are used in parts of the world where English is primarily a lingua franca, they're still heavily influenced by, these traditional views of English,
Right.
often prioritizing, British or American standards.
Yeah.
It's a complex situation,
For sure.
with economic and political factors involved.
Right, right. So we have this like push for a more inclusive and diverse approach to English. But, we also have these powerful forces that make change difficult.
Yeah.
So is there any hope for a real shift in how English is taught and assessed?
There's definitely reason for optimism, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
While there are these barriers, the research that's supporting the effectiveness of Global English's approaches is growing.
Okay, that's good news. And, this is where the rubber really meets the road. Studies are starting to show that this Global English's approach isn't just, some feel-good theory.
Right.
It actually helps students become more confident and better communicators.
Right.
Can you give us an example from the research?
Certainly. One study looked at how ELF principles, English as a lingua franca, are being integrated into, teaching practices, to understand ELF.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Could you maybe give us a little more background on what ELF actually means?
Of course, yeah.
I think some of our listeners might not be totally familiar with that term.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Essentially, ELF recognizes that in a lot of contexts, English is being used as a common language between people who don't share a native language. Okay. Think about international business, diplomacy, even online gaming communities, things like that.
Right. So it's less about sounding like a native speaker and more about being able to communicate effectively with people from all different backgrounds.
Exactly, yeah. In these ELF contexts.
Right.
Communication strategies, the ability to understand different accents, and, navigating these cultural nuances. Yeah. They become, like, even more important than grammatical perfection.
That makes a lot of sense. So how did this particular study about ELF in the classroom actually work?
The researchers partnered with teachers to observe how they were incorporating these ELF principles into their lessons.
Right.
They wanted to see how, focusing on communication strategies and intercultural awareness affected students' ability to interact with people from, different linguistic and cultural backgrounds.
So what did they find? Did this ELF-focused approach make a difference?
The findings were really encouraging.
Okay.
Students in those ELF-focused classrooms showed improvements in their ability to communicate effectively across cultures.
That's great.
They also reported feeling more confident in their English skills, even if their grammar wasn't always perfect, which is really important.
That's fantastic. So it's not just a theoretical idea.
Right.
It's actually having a positive impact on learners' communication skills.
Yeah.
And their confidence in using English. I bet that's really empowering for students. So what other cool research did this TESOL quarterly article highlight?
Another study that really stood out looked at the implementation of a Global English's curriculum in South Korean high schools.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and this research really focused on how teachers adapted the curriculum to meet the specific needs of their students.
Yeah.
And the local context, It wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So that sounds like it requires a lot of creativity and flexibility on the part of the teachers.
Right.
How did the researchers support the teachers in that process?
They worked really closely with the teachers to help them navigate the challenges of, adapting materials, addressing cultural sensitivities, and just making sure that the curriculum was really reflective of, a global English's perspective. Yeah. It wasn't just about, changing a few words in a textbook. It was about shifting the underlying philosophy of language teaching.
So it was a real collaboration
between
researchers and teachers working together to create a more relevant
Hmm.
and engaging learning experience
Yeah.
for the students. Did this research look at any other regions where these global Englishes approaches are being used?
Yes, the article also highlighted a fascinating partnership in Cambodia. Yeah, in Cambodia, where researchers and teachers worked together to develop materials that reflect local varieties of English.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's not just academics
Yeah.
kind of, in their ivory tower saying how things should be done. It's a
Right.
true partnership
Yeah.
where, everyone's voice is heard.
Exactly.
So what else stood out to you about this whole push toward a more, inclusive approach to English?
I think one of the most exciting things is the emphasis on collaboration
Okay.
between researchers and teachers.
Yeah.
This ensures that the theory actually translates into like real world practice
Except.
and that the research stays grounded in, the actual needs of learners.
Right. So it's not just research for the sake of research.
Exactly.
It's about like actually making a difference in classrooms.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what does that collaboration between, researchers and teachers actually look like?
Hmm.
Can you give us an example?
So imagine a researcher who's, wants to understand how a global English's approach is impacting, say, students' confidence.
Okay.
Right? A teacher who's actually using that approach in their classroom
Yeah.
would be such a valuable resource.
They could share like, firsthand insights,
Exactly.
real-world observations, maybe even help design the study itself.
Exactly. And that's what the article refers to as this teaching research nexus.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about bringing together the expertise of researchers
Mm-hmm.
and the practical knowledge of teachers to create more robust and relevant studies.
Okay, so instead of, researchers kind of working in isolation,
Right.
they're teaming up with teachers who are, kind of on the front lines.
Exactly.
I can see how that would lead to like much more meaningful research.
Yeah.
So did the article mention any specific studies that have come out of this teaching research nexus?
Yeah, one study that they mentioned looked at how ELF principles,
Yeah.
English as a lingua franca.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's all
Mhm.
about being able to communicate effectively with people from all different backgrounds, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So in this study, researchers worked closely with teachers to observe how they were incorporating, those principles into their lessons.
Okay.
And then they analyzed the impact on students' communication skills.
So what did they find?
Yeah.
Did focusing on those ELF principles actually make a difference?
The findings were pretty promising.
Okay.
Students showed improvements in their ability to, communicate effectively across cultures.
That's great.
And they reported feeling more confident in their English skills.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. So it sounds like this, collaborative approach to research is really yielding some positive results
Yeah,
for both teachers and learners.
absolutely.
I bet that's really empowering for students.
It is.
So are there any other examples of these successful partnerships between, researchers and teachers?
Absolutely. The article also highlighted a study that looked at the implementation of a global English's curriculum in South Korean high schools.
Oh, interesting. And what was the focus of that study?
So the researchers wanted to understand how teachers were adapting the curriculum to, fit the specific needs of their students
Wow.
and the local context.
Yeah, makes sense. Every classroom is different.
Right.
And those cookie cutter approaches rarely work.
Right. So, it wasn't just a matter of plugging in, a pre-made program. It was
Right.
a lot more dynamic than that.
Yeah. So how did the teachers in this study actually make the global English's curriculum their own?
Well, that's where the collaboration with researchers was so valuable.
Okay.
The researchers provided support and guidance to the teachers
Okay.
as they, kind of navigated the complexities of adapting materials,
Right.
addressing, cultural sensitivities,
Mhm.
and just making sure that the curriculum was, truly a reflection of a global English's perspective.
So it sounds like it wasn't just like a superficial nod to global Englishes.
Right.
It was a real attempt to transform teaching practices.
Yeah.
So what were some of the specific challenges that the teachers faced in that process?
One challenge was finding materials that, accurately represented the diversity of Englishes spoken around the world.
Yeah.
A lot of textbooks, even those that claim to be, global,
Right.
still tend to prioritize like British or American English.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be frustrating for for teachers who are trying to, create a more inclusive and representative experience for their students.
Yeah, so how did they overcome that challenge?
Well, some teachers got really creative and developed their own materials,
Right.
drawing on authentic sources like online videos,
Right.
music, even social media posts.
That's cool.
Yeah, from English speakers around the world. That's a great example of, teachers taking initiative and kind of going beyond those traditional textbooks to find resources that are, more relevant and engaging.
Exactly.
For their students, did the researchers play a role in helping teachers to find and create these alternative materials?
They did. They worked with the teachers to, identify resources, provided feedback on, lesson plans, offered suggestions for, incorporating authentic materials into the curriculum.
That sounds like a true partnership.
It was.
Where researchers and teachers are learning from each other and working toward this common goal.
So what other challenges did teachers face in implementing a global English's curriculum?
Another challenge that came up was addressing cultural sensitivities.
Right.
It's not just about, exposing students to different accents and dialects.
Right.
But it's also about helping them understand, the cultural norms and values.
Yeah. Associated with those different ways of speaking English.
That's a really important point. We can't just focus on language in isolation, right?
Right.
We have to consider the cultural context as well.
Absolutely.
So did the researchers provide any guidance to the teachers on how to, navigate those cultural complexities?
They did. They facilitated workshops and discussions to help teachers develop, strategies for teaching about culture in a respectful and sensitive way.
Right.
And they also encouraged teachers to, involve students in those conversations.
That's good.
Yeah, drawing on their own cultural backgrounds and experiences.
That's a great way to create a more inclusive and student-centered learning environment.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this research in South Korea is a really compelling example of how these global English's principles can be, put into practice in a thoughtful and impactful way. What about other parts of the world? Is this happening elsewhere?
Yeah, the article mentioned that even commercial textbooks, especially those used in regions like Cambodia, are starting to incorporate more global English's perspectives.
That's encouraging. Is that a top-down shift, coming from publishers, or are, textbook writers on the ground realizing that things need to change?
It seems to be a bit of both. There's this increasing awareness among publishers that they need to, cater to the needs of a globalized market.
Right.
But the article also highlights, examples of writers who are proactively choosing to reflect, the diverse Englishes spoken in their specific regions.
So a textbook written for, students in Cambodia might include examples of, Cambodian English, Indian English, Australian English, reflecting the real world linguistic landscape that those students are likely to encounter.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's about making English language learning, more relevant and authentic
for learners around the world.
Right.
But even with all this progress, we can't, ignore the impact of standardized testing.
Right.
We talked earlier about how those tests often adhere to a very narrow definition of quote unquote correct English, which can really disadvantage students who've learned English in, more diverse contexts.
Right.
So is there any sign that the testing industry is starting to, embrace a more global English's perspective?
That's a great question, and it's one that the article addresses directly.
Okay.
And while there's still a long way to go,
Yeah.
there are some encouraging signs.
Really, what are some of the changes that are happening in that world?
So researchers are developing new assessment tools that focus more on, communicative effectiveness in these diverse contexts rather than just, grammatical accuracy.
So instead of just testing, whether someone knows the difference between who and whom, these new assessments might look at a student's ability to, I don't know, participate in a group discussion with people from different countries.
Yeah.
Or give a presentation that's clear and engaging
Exactly.
for an international audience.
They're trying to, move beyond rote memorization.
Right. Yeah.
And really focus on skills that are relevant for global communication.
That's a big shift. It sounds like a much more holistic and authentic way to assess English language proficiency.
I think so.
Are there any like real world examples of these new assessments being used?
Yeah, some universities, particularly those with, diverse international student populations,
Okay.
are starting to incorporate these, more holistic assessments into their admissions process.
So that's encouraging.
Yeah.
So instead of just relying on like a single standardized test score,
Right.
they might look at, a student's portfolio of work or their participation in class discussions,
Mhm.
or even, their ability to collaborate effectively with peers from different cultures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there are many ways to be successful in English,
Right.
and that fluency doesn't have to, look or sound a certain way.
Yeah, this is all really promising. It seems like we're starting to see a real shift
Yeah.
toward a more inclusive and equitable approach to English language teaching and assessment.
Yeah.
It's exciting, but it's also, a little daunting to think about all the changes that need to happen to make this shift a reality.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's true that it's a big shift,
Yeah.
and it won't happen overnight.
Right.
The article emphasizes the importance of continued research,
Right.
particularly longitudinal studies that, track the long-term impact of these global Englishes approaches.
Yeah.
We need more evidence
Right.
to convince policymakers, curriculum developers, and yes, even those standardized testing folks that this is more than just a passing trend.
Solid data to back
Yeah.
up the good vibes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for it.
Exactly.
But it's not just about, research, right?
Yeah.
What can we as individuals, as learners, as teachers, or
Mm.
just, people who are interested in language,
Right.
what can we do to embrace this shift toward global Englishes?
I think the biggest thing is to stay curious.
Okay.
Explore the incredible diversity of Englishes
Yeah.
spoken around the world, listen to podcasts,
Right.
watch films, read books from different cultures,
Yeah.
challenge your own assumptions about, what correct English sounds like.
And don't be afraid to celebrate your own unique voice.
Absolutely.
Whether you're an English learner or a teacher
Mhm.
or just someone who loves language.
Right.
Remember that fluency isn't about, conformity.
Yeah,
It's about connection.
it is.
And that's something worth striving for.
Absolutely.
So after this deep dive into global Englishes,
Mhm.
what stands out to you?
I think the key takeaway for me is that the world of English is vast and ever-changing, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Well said.
Go out there and explore.
I love that. And speaking of exciting new developments,
Yeah.
I was particularly intrigued by the study that was mentioned in the outline about using AI chatbots
Oh, yeah.
in those immersive 3D metaverse environments to
Yeah.
help pre-service teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Those are teachers in training,
Yeah.
develop a stronger awareness of global Englishes. Can you tell us more about that study?
It is a really exciting area of research.
Mm.
The study highlights how technology can be this powerful tool for, expanding perspectives and creating those engaging learning experiences for teachers.
Yeah.
Imagine a pre-service teacher, right, in, say, Iowa,
Mm-hmm.
being able to interact with, like, virtual representations of English speakers
Right.
from all over the world.
That's so cool.
Yeah, India, Nigeria, Singapore, they can, practice their communication skills in
Yeah.
a safe and immersive environment,
Right.
and maybe even challenge some of their own, assumptions about what good English even sounds like.
That's fascinating. So instead of just, reading about all these different varieties of English in a textbook,
Mm-hmm.
they could actually experience those varieties firsthand
Yeah,
in a way that feels real and authentic.
right.
So did the researchers find that this immersive experience actually, had an impact on how these future teachers thought about global Englishes?
They did. The researchers found that interacting with these AI chatbots in the metaverse
Uh-huh.
really had a significant impact on those pre-service teachers' attitudes toward global Englishes.
Okay.
It helped them see English as this, dynamic, fluid, truly global language.
Yeah.
And that, made them feel more confident in teaching it.
It sounds like this kind of technology could be like a game changer for teacher training. It could really help to equip these future teachers
Right.
with the skills and mindsets they need to really embrace, the diversity of English in their classrooms.
Right, right.
But even with, all this cutting edge research and all these, innovative teaching approaches, we still haven't fully answered the question of, how we measure success
Right.
in a world where perfect English is no longer the gold standard.
You're right. It's a question that researchers and educators are really grappling with. And
Yeah.
there's no, easy answer.
Right.
Traditional metrics like standardized test scores
Yeah.
often don't really capture that full picture of
Gotcha.
communicative competence in a globalized world.
So if we're moving away from those, those traditional measures,
Right.
what's the alternative?
Yeah.
How do we know if learners are truly succeeding in English?
Right.
If we're not just focusing on, grammar and pronunciation.
The article points to the need for these more holistic assessments
Okay.
that take into account a wider range of skills and contexts. Things like the ability to communicate effectively across cultures,
Right.
to adapt to different communication styles,
Mm-hmm.
and to understand and use a variety of Englishes.
So instead of just focusing on like accuracy,
Right.
we should be looking at things like, fluency,
Uh-huh.
flexibility, and the ability to like navigate those real world communication challenges.
Exactly.
So what would those assessments actually look like
Yeah.
in practice?
It could involve things like, collaborating on a project with a team of people from different countries,
Right.
giving a presentation that's clear and engaging for, an international audience,
Mhm.
or even, mediating a conflict between people from different cultural backgrounds.
Well, those are some real world scenarios.
Yeah.
It sounds like these assessments would be much more aligned with the the actual demands of using English in a globalized context.
Absolutely.
But I imagine it'd be pretty challenging to design and
Yeah.
implement these kinds of assessments on a large scale.
It's definitely not without its challenges.
Right.
But researchers are working on developing, new tools and frameworks
Right.
for assessing what they call, global communicative competence.
Yeah.
And there are already, some promising examples of these more holistic assessments
Oh, yeah.
being used in, universities and other educational settings.
That's great to hear. It seems like the field of English language teaching is undergoing a pretty significant transformation right now.
Yeah.
Moving away from this, narrow focus on correctness to really embrace the diversity and the fluidity
Yeah.
of English as this global language.
Right.
It's exciting, but it's also, a little daunting to think about like all the changes that need to happen to make this shift a reality.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's true. It's a big shift.
Yeah.
And it won't happen overnight.
Right.
The article really emphasizes the importance of continued research,
Okay.
particularly, longitudinal studies that track the long-term impact of these global Englishes approaches.
Right.
We need more evidence to convince policymakers,
Yeah.
curriculum developers,
Mhm.
and yes, even those standardized testing folks,
Right.
that this is more than just a, passing trend.
Yeah. Solid data to back up the good vibes.
Exactly.
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But it's not just about research, right?
No.
What can we, as individuals, as learners, as teachers, or just, people who are interested in language, what can we do to kind of embrace this shift toward global Englishes?
I think the biggest thing is to stay curious.
Oh.
Explore the incredible diversity of Englishes that are spoken around the world. Like,
Yeah.
listen to podcasts,
Right.
watch films, read books from different cultures.
Right.
Challenge your own assumptions about what correct English sounds like.
And don't be afraid to celebrate your own unique voice.
Absolutely.
Whether you're an English learner or a teacher
Mm-hmm.
or just someone who loves language.
Yeah.
Remember that fluency isn't about, conformity.
Right.
It's about connection.
It is.
And that's something worth striving for.
Absolutely.
So after this deep dive into global Englishes,
Mm.
what stands out to you?
I think the key takeaway for me is that the world of English is vast
Yeah,
and ever changing.
for sure.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Well said.
Go out there and explore.
I love that. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into global Englishes. I hope this has given you some food for thought. about, how language evolves, how we teach it, how we learn it,
Yeah.
and how we can all kind of embrace the beautiful diversity of English in a globalized world.
It's a beautiful thing.
We've only scratched the surface,
Yeah.
but hopefully this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
Yeah.
There's a whole universe of languages and cultures out there.
Absolutely.
Go explore.
It's out there.
Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.